Welcome to Chebacco Chats, Season 3, Episode 15. I'm Jenna Jandreau, Communications and Engagement Manager at MDI Historical Society, and your host today. Chebacco Chats uses a webinar format. So while you can see and hear us, we cannot see or hear our audience. We do invite you to ask questions and send comments using the chat feature at the bottom of your Zoom screens. Feel free to ask whenever a question arises. However, I will only be taking questions and addressing those questions at the end of the program. So I'm going to share my screen now. Can you see my screen, Bill?
I can.
Okay, so today I am speaking to Bill Horner, who grew up on MDI and practiced general surgery for 38 years. Since retiring in 2007, he has immersed himself in local and regional history, presided over the MDI Historical Society for 10 years, and founded the History Trust. Welcome back to Chebacco Chats, Bill.
Thank you, Jenna. It's always great to see you. And I love the format of Chebacco Chats. It's terrific.
Thank you. So today we are going to be talking about MDI's Gilded Age of Yachting and a little bit more. I would like to start us by setting the scene a little bit, and I would love to ask you, what is it like to sail?
Beautifully, the sailing ship nodalizes the forces of wind and sea, converting them to her purpose. It is this perfect adjusting of ourselves to the elements, the perfect equipoise between them and us, which gives us a part of our life joy. The words of D.H. Lawrence, as he was commenting on Richard Henry Dana's 2 years before the mast at the latter part of the 19th century. And those words really strike me, certainly from the aesthetic perspective of why one wants to get on a boat with sails and go. There is joy in sailing a boat. But there's also a little bit of basic physics. So let me just talk about that a little bit. Here you have this marvelous picture, Willard Ballard of Mount Desert Island from the collection, showing a schooner yacht close to the wind. She's on a starboard tack because she's listening to port. Her sails are beautifully trimmed. And she's throwing up a wave. There may be the photography boat that was going alongside, actually, so this creating its own wake. So this may not be an absolutely clean thing, but I think this picture is just a beautiful expression of the sense of joy that one gets in taking an invisible force like wind and translating that into the power that's able to move a heavy thing like a schooner yacht. When you put a boat in water and it floats, it will displace a certain volume of water. If it's a 3-ton boat, it'll displace almost 3 tons of water. 3 tons of water is a big weight. And to move forward, this boat must move that water aside. Some of it gets pushed laterally, what we see as a wake coming off a boat. Some of it is pushed vertically down deeper into the water. All of this is achieved through the hydrodynamic shape of the underwater part of the boat, the keel primarily, and the aerodynamic shape of the sails. And once they're properly balanced, the feeling is one of, as my friend Lawrence says, one of equipoise or balance. However, sailboats rarely sail perfectly upright. So for the non-sailor, there is the element of what we call heel. This boat is gently heeled away from the wind to what we call the leeward side as it moves forward. That is simply the way sailboats work. And most of the time, the angle of heel is controlled by the skipper or helmsman to strike the perfect balance. If you're not heeling enough, you may not be catching the wind just right. If you're heeling too much, and you might go to the next slide, as we see here, you may be losing the best part of the wind, because the best wind is aloft. That's why most sails, in the modern age anyway, are quite high. And here you have a gaff-rigged boat that's heeled way over and is probably losing much of the wind that it could be capturing if it were more upright, because the wind on the surface is slowed down by its friction with the water. So most people who don't or are not accustomed to sailing want to know, if I get on the sailboat, how much is it going to tip? And the answer is not necessarily very much. That's not a reason not to go sailing. I think the other thing that I should say is it's easy to fall in love with sailboats. I've fallen in love with many sailboats, I'm afraid to say, or not ashamed to say, but it is a rather contagious condition to which I think most sailors will admit a tendency.
It certainly has a romance and an allure for even those who are not inside that world. Now, we're talking about the Gilded Age in your Chebacco article. So what was the Gilded Age on MDI, and how did sailing have a role in that?
So from a point of view of time, I would say most people agree that the Gilded Age in the United States started perhaps a decade after the cessation of the Civil War and extended probably up to World War I, the late part of the 1910s, 1920. So it was about a 40 or 50 year period of time in which great wealth was amassed, and primarily that resulted in the need, because most of the capitals of wealth, shall we say, were located in cities. And cities in the 19th and early 20th centuries weren't necessarily the healthiest places to be in the summer. And so those who could afford it wanted to escape to what one author has called a pleasure periphery, which in the case of New England, New York, Philadelphia, Boston, emerged as Nantucket, Newport, Rye Beach in New Hampshire, and of course our own Mount Desert Island. In my history of the island during this period of time, it's very, very clear that from the outset, Bar Harbor in particular was entirely focused on attracting summer visitors. They were called watering holes back in that period of time. The watering hole that became Bar Harbor was exemplified in some of the paintings of the Hudson River School, these heroic paintings that portrayed the rock-bound coast, which were seen, of course, by wealthy clients in the financial centers. They wanted to be there in the summertime. And so what you had was an era starting in the 1850s and 60s in Bar Harbor, where small hotels began to spring up, then larger hotels, then even larger hotels, and then finally privately owned structures, mansions, if you will, called cottages, replete with beautiful landscaping. And in this photo, you have a kind of summation of those two tendencies. I think that is probably John Stuart Kennedy's Carnarvon in the background with the turret off to the side. That site is now occupied by Ruth Colquitt. It is close to where Rick Wheeler's forebears, the Scotts, had their Chiltern estate, and you can see a number of others located on some of the higher ground. In the foreground, you see a big steam yacht, probably similar to Corsair, which was owned by J.P. Morgan, who was a frequent visitor up here. J.P. Morgan was also Commodore of the New York Yacht Club. And so in this era, with these summer visitors of some notoriety and connections, Bar Harbor encouraged something called the Downeast Cruise, or at least to become the easternmost station of the Downeast Cruise, a term that was probably invented down in the North Shore of Massachusetts. I think the Eastern Yacht Club of Marblehead would like to claim that. But be it all as it may, Bar Harbor was interested in attracting these cruising boats and their skippers and sailors and so on and so forth to the island in the summer. And as a result, to accommodate their social needs, you had the creation of the Mount Desert Reading Room, which is in part now incorporated into the Motor Hotel Bar Harbor. The Kibo Club, which is now a golf club, was originally a social club with a racetrack. And of course, the Pot and Kettle Club, which came about in, I think, about 1912. So all of these social institutions grew up with this influx in the summertime, which really defined the economy and social structure, if you will, first of Bar Harbor, and then subsequently other places where sailing became prominent on the island, mainly to the west of us.
So let's talk boats a little bit, since I know you're very enthusiastic to do that. Give me a little bit of background about some of these racing yachts or some of the schooners that we're seeing in these photographs.
So initially, the boats were big. They required large crews. The type of sailing that was done in the Downeast cruise had all manner of sizes of yachts. Often, many of them were adapted from the pre-existing schooners and were called schooner yachts. There are other designs as well, but they were large, and many of the newspaper reports of sailing well into the late 1800s around Bar Harbor included large yachts of this size. Later, in the early 1900s, people began to be interested in racing. And as a result, the design of the yachts that came off the desks of naval architects changed accordingly. And I think we're going to talk about a few of those. But first, we have to pay homage to our ancestors. What you see here is a wonderful reproduction of a boat called a shallop. This was made for the MDI Historical Society by Dwayne Muzzy, very talented crafter of boat models. And I'll just briefly give you the historical background here. After the Viking after the Vikings landed at Lancemeadow and those areas up around Newfoundland in the around 1000, there was a wave of fishermen who primarily came from the Basque region of Spain and France, then the English, and they had discovered, of course, the big cod fishery off Newfoundland. And so they used a type of boat that varied in length from 20 to 30 feet. Let's go back to the shallop there just for a moment. Yeah, we're going in the wrong direction. Here we go. There, almost. So this was the boat that set the stage for all future development. As I say, they were of Spanish origin, of Portuguese origin, French origin. Champlain had shallops en faigal, as they say, which is medium pieces, on his large caravel that he used to discover this island. So they were commonly used once a larger craft had come to an area that it wanted to explore. And you'll note that this is a combination of propulsion, both rowing, you see the rowing seats here, and the spritzel, which was a sort of very early form of sail. So these boats could be propelled either by manpower or wind power. So there's the shallop. You've seen it. We give it its due because from that were descended the Chebacco boats, the pinky schooners, the conventional schooners, that then gradually, as sailing became more of a pastime than a mercantile activity, became the schooner yachts and the other designs to follow. So, next. In 1851, what we're going to talk about now is speed. Yes, boats had a functional capacity, but speed under sail became a preoccupation for a number of reasons. In this case, in the 1850s, there were a number of pilot boats in New York City, and pilot boats had to be fast because they would go out to meet the incoming large commercial vessels, and the first pilot boat to get there would, of course, get the tariff, or how are they paid for the services of a pilot boat. So the fastest boat got the purse. And so in 1851, the New York Yacht Club engaged a guy named George Steers because in that year, the Queen Victoria Crystal Palace exhibition was taking place in England, of course, and they had advertised a race that would circumnavigate the Isle of Wight. And so these gentlemen at the New York Yacht Club engaged Mr. Sears to modify the design of a pilot boat, and the result was America. And the change in design that made this boat fast was, as you can see from the half hull here, it had an upward rising keel. Most of the schooners that preceded this time had a very flat keel, which resulted in a very full-bodied bow. Here you can see the keel line extending upward from aft to forward, which cut away what is known as the forefoot. It made the entry of the boat as it moved forward slimmer. Also, the widest part of the boat was frequently in the bow, the so-called cod head mackerel tail type of schooner. And that widest part was moved aft, almost to midships. So with that alteration in design, this became what looked like an ordinary schooner above the water, and below the waterline, a very fast hull design. And as a result, when they sailed across the Atlantic, which they had to do first, and engaged in this circumnavigation of the Isle of Wight, there were 15 yachts in the race. It was a total of 53 nautical miles. And America literally blew them out of the water. There's a wonderful Fitzhenry Lane painting of America coming in on the to the finish line wing and wing, meaning that the sails are put out on either side of the boats coming down the wind. And there's a famous quote. Apparently Queen Victoria asked one of her aides de camp, well, who came in second? And the reply was, Your Majesty, there is no second. So from there, we jump forward about 40 years to Gloriana. I'll talk a little more about her. Let's go back just for a second. Thanks, Jenna. What I've done here is I've lined up 4 different designs from different points in time, but off the same naval architect's desk. And that was, of course, the Wizard of Bristol, Nathaniel Herreshoff. So on the top, you have Gloriana. I've listed the waterline lengths on the left. I'm sorry, the lengths overall on the left, the waterline lengths on the right. Gloriana, 1891, 40 years after America, was a radical departure in design. As you can see now, the forefoot is essentially gone. This boat was so fast, and I'll give you a look at her above the water line, above water in just a minute, that she virtually defeated every competition that she participated in for about 8 or 9 years. Gloriana actually came to Bar Harbor. It's mentioned in the local newspapers as one of those Downeast cruises one year. Just below Gloriana, you have another Herreshoff design, a Bar Harbor 31. I'll tell you a little bit more about them in just a minute. Directly below that, or second from the bottom, is one of my favorite designs, the S-Class. And then at the very bottom, you have the smallest one of all, the famous Herreshoff 12.5. This is probably the most famous Herreshoff design, simply because of its utility, the delicacy of its underwater design, and its ease of being built. They were originally, of course, built in wood with a gaff rig. When fiberglass technology came along, they were easily converted to something called a bullseye, which is a very common boat to be seen even today. But what this reflects is a couple of, I think, general trends, both in terms of yachting and in terms of social development. First of all, the boats get smaller and smaller and smaller. And for a very good reason, because at the turn of the century, serious racers wanted to race boats that were essentially identical to one another. This wasn't possible with the great big boats. You couldn't build 15 Glorianas and race them all together. But with the Bar Harbor 31, it was a different matter. That particular one, the second from the top, came to Bar Harbor in 1903. There were eventually between 13 and 15 of them that were owned by members of the Mount Desert Yacht Racing Association. A story for another time. The same can be said for the S-Class and for the Harrishoff 12.5 / Bullseye. But the reduction in size made possible the sailing of these boats with a smaller and smaller crew, and with, most importantly, a younger and younger crew. So what we start to see is an awareness that if we're going to have a future in yachting, we have to include the young people. And so we'll get to that in just a moment. So let's just drift down through, let's see, where are we? So here's Gloriana. An incredible
In the interest of time, Bill, do you mind if I just go through some of these boat
Yeah,
above the
sure.
water photos? And then I have one really important question I'd like to ask before we wrap up.
Oh
So
my
I'm going to
gosh,
do.
is it happening that quickly?
It is. It is. I don't
We
have
were just
any.
getting underway.
I know. I don't have any cinematic montage music queued up for
Okay,
this
let's
section.
go. Let's go.
Okay,
I'm
you
getting
can
carried
say
away
things,
here.
but I'm just gonna go. We'll start with Gloriana, and
Yeah,
then
so
I
here
have
we
a
have
few more.
Gloriana, a cutter rig above, that radical design below. Next one is Bar Harbor 31, I believe, under sail. This is Bat, which belonged to Rick. If you're listening, this is this is your grandfather's boat. Next down we come to Kipper. All right. So this, I'm going to have to take a few minutes to talk about Kipper. Can I?
Sure.
All right. So I told you the boats are getting smaller and smaller, more manageable, more attention paid to young sailors. So here we have an example of what were known as the 17-foot knockabouts. And this was a design revolution that took place down on the North Shore of Boston. Crown and Shield, the designer for Manchester, Boardman, the designer for Marblehead. They both came up with very, very similar designs, looking exactly, this happens to be an A boat that belonged to Garish Milliken back in the day. You can see a number of them out there in this race from long ago. Those boats eventually, almost in their entirety, made their way to Northeast Harbor and became the A boats and B boats that were the stable of the Northeast Harbor fleet for so many years. A number of the B boats also made their way to Dark Harbor, where they exist today as Dark Harbor 17s. Few wound up in Bar Harbor, Islesboro, elsewhere. Okay. Next, we have Artemis. This is a living boat. She was launched in 1924. She belonged to Rick's uncle, Warwick Potter Scott. She's still alive today and lives on peacefully on a mooring in Sorrento with her sister ship Jasitaqua. And Rick and I had the absolute honor and privilege of sailing Artemis summer before this one just passed. It was just a glorious experience. In the interest of time, I will keep moving because there's a great end to this story. Here you have, can you go to the next slide? So this is an early Northeast Harbor fleet in the late 40s. Here are A boats lining up. Here's the old committee boat. But I think, and not seen here, and if I don't mention these two, I know I'm going to get a lot of grief. The International One Designs came in 1938, Luder 16s in 1946. Both of these boats persist to today, actually, as the modern masterpieces of design in the fleet. And but where are the young sailors? We don't see any kids on these boats. How are they taught? How did sailboat racing on Mount Desert Island evolve to the inclusive community entity that it is today? Well, you're going to have to read next year's Chebacco to get the complete answer to that. Because there's an article in there by somebody you'll probably recognize, but I want to cut to the end here because my time is running out. And here's a happy ending. Look at this. What has happened over this period of time is an evolution in the social and economic aspects of sailing, and the recognition that these sailing organizations really have to include young people, interest them in the sport of sailing, and that these young people really come not only from our summer visitors, but from the year-round community as well. And so on the right here, you see the Great Harbor Sailing logo designed by Sue Charles. You can see the burgees of 5 area yacht clubs, which means that at a point in time, they came together, pitched in and bought some small hot boats that were used by the first in the state Mount Desert Island High School sailing team. But at the same time, there was the development of the Mount Desert Island Community Sailing Center in Southwest Harbor. And here you see this group of young people, Lucas Ingebrigtsen on the left, Connor Radcliffe, Alec Fischella, Sean Beaulieu, and Sophie Dowling, who were the North American International One Design Championships champions in the races that were held in the Great Harbor off Northeast Harbor just this past September. And it's a wonderful fitting irony that Glenn Squires took this photograph because he basically, with help, created the Mount Desert Island Community Sailing Center that educated these kids. And look at them, just incredible end of the story. So there's a lot more to it. I wish I could go on and on and on. I should say that Kevin Elk didn't make the photograph, but he subbed in on one of the days of the championships. And what we have today, my final word, is this marvelous collaboration between of the various fleets on the island, the Northeast Harbor Sailing School, and the Community Sailing Center at Southwest Harbor. And anybody who wants to can learn how to sail, and it's a great life lesson. So there
Well,
you go.
after your incredible introduction and description of sailing, I can't see why anyone would pass up the opportunity. And I have been on a schooner, but I was racking my brain, and I honestly don't think I have been on a smaller sailboat. So I have to remedy this summer 2023.
I
I'm
can
going to
remedy
stop.
that.
Great. I love it. I can stop sharing my screen now. And while I'm doing that, welcome anybody to ask any questions as we are wrapping up now. We went a few minutes over, but I think we did a great job, Bill, considering the big topic we tried to squish into a half an hour. I did not receive any questions through your presentation, and
Lord.
none are coming in at this time. So I will express my gratitude to you, Bill. It's always great to talk to you and hear your research, and also your experience are both really priceless to me, and I know many more, especially those that joined us this evening. So thank you for being here.
I think just one quick coda here. I think Ben Purse is out there somewhere, and I just want to tell him that Captain Horniblower stopped by for just a moment, but he left this, and I thought it made me look like the Flying Nun or something like that. So I chose not to wear it during the presentation, but anyway.
Oh, well, I love the Captain Horniblower hat. I'm glad that it's still with you, even though I think it should travel.
He's always here.
We received a comment how Bill seemed like he had much more to say about his topic, and that we would like a second edition. I'm happy to say that since Bill is the author of the article he mentioned in the Chebacco 2023 edition, which is on maritime history, that we will very likely be getting a second part to this talk in 2023. So thank you so much for being with us today, Bill, and to our audience.
Yeah, pleasure.
This was our last episode of Chebacco Chats Season 3. We will be returning with Season 4 in March 2023. To view a full archive of our Chebacco Chat series, visit our website at www.mdihistory.org/Chebacco-chats. If you have any questions for me or the staff, please email us at info@mdihistory.org and we will be in touch. We will see you next year with a new season, welcoming guests who study and celebrate history, the great place that is Mount Desert Island, and the way the island impacts the wider world. So thank you and happy holidays to everyone. Good night.
Merry Christmas, Jenna.
Take care.